Welcome to Y11 Audio. I'm Alex Alvarado. Thank you for listening. Been a minute. Last time I actually did one of these, I was by the lake, and not just one of these Michigan lakes. There was a mountain nearby, Washington. Cool state. Try it out. One of these days, I'm gonna have to make it back there. I made it to the Space Needle. Didn't go up it. Just crunch for time. Wanted to do some other things with other people too. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it, even though I've taken, some episodes off, but that's kind of the theme of the show, I suppose. Lost to Washington after the last time we spoke on this podcast, 30-9. A couple days ago, EMU got back on the right track, beating Jacksonville State 37-34 in double overtime. Gets the record up to 2-1. Decent start to the year on paper. Love to see a 2-1 start. Love to see a home opener go the way you wanted to. Love welcoming UMass back into the league. Well, pre-welcoming them back, right? Like, hey, you got us. You got Toledo to lose to next. Buffalo to lose to next. UMass is just looking really terrible over there. But when has UMass been looking good over there? Like, ever since I started paying attention to UMass at all. So, after that win, got 4 downs on this episode to come up. Gonna shoot for 2 episodes this week. One today, one, later on. First down, just quickly re-looking back at some of the experience that the Washington week gave and the Jacksonville State, both in conjunction, as St. Francis comes to town next week. We'll talk about that in the next episode, to close out non-conference play and transition its way into the MAC slate. Let's see. Thumbs up, thumbs down to the side. Let's see. Obviously, this team is improving, right? The Washington game had some exciting starts. About at some point during the second quarter, you can kind of debate when that was. Is somewhere between things really fell apart for Eastern in that game. Somewhere between Cole Snyder's fumble and Jonah Coleman's really, really long run to flip the field and get Washington its first passing score of the day. Of course, Jesus Gomez was the highlight of that one with 2 school records in one day, a 57 plus having 2 50s with his leg in the day. So that was good to see, especially for his family to, make the trip from Mexico. And, they're not able to obviously go to all of his home games. It's so dang far. So for them to show out and to, be there for that occasion, really, really cool for them. And then plus having an encore performance of sorts, even though he missed one from 49 yards out, that just doinked right off the left upright. Him and Garrison Ripa, the kicker over at Jacksonville State, just seemed like they were dueling back and forth all day. 9 total field goal attempts were kicked in that game. Really, the best thing that you can say for Eastern is that, it's, and we'll get into it a little bit more, but, the depth is definitely being challenged right now, and that's either a good or a bad thing. That we're going to have let's say 30 different discussions on that, one for each player, whether that's a good or bad thing for them. The best you can hope for is that it will pan out for them in the long run, if not, through the difficult parts of October, the really, deciding parts, the really important moments. But also it's going to pan out for them in years to come as well. Obviously, if you're Eastern, if you're any football team, you don't want to be without your starters. You don't want to be without your best players. That's, when a loss could really, really hurt you. But thankfully this is all non-conference play. That doesn't mean that, okay, they're just going to get through this injury stuff and then after that, once we get to MAC play, then they'll be full strength, because this is going to be a team that's a lot like last year, where they're going to be battle tested with injuries. And so the Washington game kind of showed a little bit of that, because Joshua Scott and Jermarian McNulty, Bryce Llewellyn, who hasn't started yet, listed starter but hasn't seen the field yet since transferring over, they were out the Washington game. And so kind of saw that through the back end when Javian Norman and Jordan Toney, when they got their first starts, along with some other guys, to start seeing the field a little bit more. That became a lot more obvious in the Jacksonville State game when Toney came out with injury. A lot of guys in that game came out with injury. Then Quintavious Scandrett, Tyrell Denier, they both got hit for targeting penalties. Quintavious Scandrett, I should point out really quickly that even though he was ejected from the game initially and didn't play the rest of the way, after his moment happened it was overtime for him. That's been reviewed post-game, and he's going to be able to play in the first half of the next game. Denier is still going to have to miss the first half of not Jacksonville State, did that St. Francis game. But still, that was a game where early and often, especially at offensive line too, but in that defensive secondary, some guys started falling down, some guys got rotated in probably more than they should have. It was already a position area where they're already just challenging its bench. And that game just showed that they have to challenge them a little bit more and maybe a little bit earlier than they might have expected to. Still, Jacksonville State, not as effective as they were last year. Still got a few ballers on that team. That Tyler Huff kid's actually a pretty decent quarterback. I like the way that he played. And they definitely got after EMU, made 12 tackles for loss. Their defense did. Still, plenty of resolve from EMU to outlast them, get into double overtimes, put Jesus Gomez in positions to kick and win. EMU did score 4 touchdowns in their first 5 possessions of the game. The problem with that, and we'll talk about this later, none in the second half. Second down. Just want to look at the MAC really, really quickly. I have my power rankings on ipsy11.com. Go ahead and check that out. But obviously, another cool weekend for the MAC. If not for Toledo beating Mississippi State a week after NIU beat Notre Dame. I still have NIU over Toledo in my power rankings just because the best win matters at this point in the year. But still, 0% surprise to see Toledo beat Mississippi State that way and to have its hot start. Big surprise from NIU, of course, when they beat Notre Dame. The rest of the MAC, I'm just not totally sure how good or bad some of these other teams are. Western Michigan and Miami, you guys are 2 teams where I'm looking at and I'm like, all right, let's really figure out what you guys are right now. Miami has obviously it lost the first game at Northwestern, had a bye week in week 2. Okay, a little bit boring. Gotta wait to see, right? And then week 3 comes around, lose to Cincinnati. What was it, 27-16? Not a particularly great game for Miami. Just, you would think after all that time there would be more spark on the offense that's just figured out. That just has not been the case. I knew that losing Gage Larvadain would be a huge loss at receiver for them. I thought they'd be able to make it up in the long run. They still can, definitely, but that obvious spark on the outside was, that's very clearly missed right now. And Western Michigan, 59-31 to Bethune-Cookman. Okay, beat up on a really bad FCS school. But you lose to Bethune-Cookman, or I'm sorry, you don't lose to them. But you do give up 31 points to BC. And that team went 3 of 15 on third downs. I see that there's 2 kick returns for touchdowns. I didn't watch the game at all. Probably not going to either. But that is, that's an eyebrow raiser right there. Ball State blanked on the road. Bleh. Kent State, I'm mad at you for scheduling these games, and I know it's a fun, holy crap joke every time it comes around. But really, if you're going to be a basketball school, stop scheduling like this. Stop scheduling like this. Because if you're a basketball school, you're expected to not do anything football-wise October, November, when basketball season starts, which means you have to give your fans something fun to look forward to in September. before they switched to basketball mode. 71-0. Sure, I get it. You run into a playoff team. But the thing is, you don't have to play Tennessee like that. And Tennessee, I expect them to be a playoff team. They didn't make the playoff previously. I need to say that. But you really don't have to schedule like this. You really, really don't. You also don't have to lose to St. Francis. That's also a big no-no. Same for you, Ball State. Same for you. Like, do you really want to, like, I don't know, man. They have a 17-year-old defensive end, apparently, who, like, did really well. Didn't watch the game. Again, not going to. 62-0. What is there to learn? Yeah, it really, really stinks, just watching, the cream of the crop just, like, kind of rise up in the MAC and, like, have good performances. And then the schools who just, like, are going to be bad. They're just, like, so much worse sometimes. Kent State and Ball State, like I said, playing really bad. They play really good teams, but they don't have to be equally as terrible for the other side to look so good. And then Akron, of course, beat Colgate, the toothpaste school, 31-20. Did you know that Colgate actually led at some point in this game, 17-0? Horrible. That's horrible, man. That is just absolutely horrible. All right, we got to move on to third down. I don't want to look at the rest of the MAC anymore. If you want to check out the power rankings, go for it. Argue over it in the comments, ipsy11.com. Thumbs up to slight improvements. And we're also going to say thumbs down to the injury bug. Slight improvements, both sides of the ball, really. But I don't know. Defense is just not as noticeable because the defense's challenges, like if you go through a bunch of numbers and just try to come up with like, okay, this is where they stood in such and such rankings and such stats, and this is how they did, this is why they were good, this is what they were good at. The defense could hardly get off the field last year. So I give a lot of grace to a lot of the defensive stats that I read of EMU's football team last year. This year, dude, they are going through it really hard with that injury bug. I mean, they are really, really going through it. But let me just look at these slight improvements first. Just looking at BCF toys, one that I like to refer to sometimes is the available yards percentage. Just, hey, how long are your drives and how many of those yards in percentage, right? How much of your yards are you actually getting? If you're marching downfield and scoring touchdowns every single drive, you're gonna be number one in the country, 100% in this category. But that's just not going to be the case because humans. Last year, EMU's offense, where did they finish? 131st in available yards. Okay, and that's pretty clear cut. Felt like it, didn't it? With how many 3 and outs that this offense faced, just not just in like the early goings of the season, but all year long. Yeah, that checks out. Don't have to double check that. I won't fact check it at all. This year, 24th in offensive yards available. That's a good spot to be in, of course. Obviously EMU is driving downfield a little bit more. Field position's doing pretty well in that regard too. This is a team that has done, 7 touchdowns, 6 field goals, 4 turnovers on downs. 7 punts, and then fumbled once by Cole Snyder. This is a team that wants to score way more touchdowns than it did last year, of course. It's kind of feeling like it's got a lot to prove, and this is a season to prove a lot. And it's good to see that this offensive improvements done with so many newcomers, not just with the transfers in their first year with the program, second years with the program even, but at offensive line too, when there's just so many guys that, whether or not they've been in the system for 6 years like Brock Roman, a few years like Mickey Revelinski, I think he was like a 2020 signee, or even guys that are like just breaking through for the first time. Maybe they've been in development for a while. Maybe they've switched positions like Jay Janvier. They're putting in fights. They're putting in efforts to right their wrongs. And while it hasn't looked pretty, and while there's, so much more improvement to be had, looking at how many yards are in front of you and saying that you're a top 25 team in at least making up the yards that are in front of you on offense, that's a good place to be at 3 games into the year. I don't expect EMU to finish as a top 25 offense in the nation right now, with just how much is kind of just, I don't know, the offensive line has just been going through it ever since the start of the year. Obviously, it didn't come into the year with the most experience with guys next to each other. Some college experience like Blake Buster transferred in, but obviously it hasn't been like a whole unit the entire way. Against Jacksonville State, like I said, 12 tackles for loss allowed. You can't really have that. I think Snyder was sacked like 7 times. Yeah, that's just not a good place to be at, just in that category alone. Thankfully, Snyder's, an experienced quarterback. He knows how to move the pocket and then just run forward when that's the best option for him. And he's done that a few times. No one's ever going to label him a dual threat, and I don't think that's ever going to be like important either. But he is making a lot of the right decisions. The Washington game wasn't great for him throwing the ball. I think UMass, he showed that he was really, really good, especially for the first half. Good to see that EMU's putting together a competent, good offense in spite of not having the most confident group. I shouldn't say confident, but without having, this obviously isn't the best offensive line that EMU's had. Obviously not even like a top 3 offensive line that Chris Creighton's had in his time at Ypsilanti. So good to see that EMU is moving in the right direction offensively. Defensively too, like I said, like stats were kind of hard to read. Introduce the available yard stat. Last year on defense, they were 118th in that regard. And again, this is yards. That's not points, right? And that was kind of the big thing. That was how EMU was able to, they were able to allow a ton of yards, but they definitely clamped down a lot when teams got near or inside the red zone. Last year, they were 118th in available yards defensively. This year, a little bit better through 3 games, 105th. Again, don't take that to the bank. Like, we're only 3 games into this. There's still an FCS school to go, and then the entire MAC slate is left after that. But what's been difficult is, of course, just the injuries have been going around, man. It's just that time of year. Last year, the injuries happened where? Up front at defensive line. This year on defense, where the injuries at? It's across the secondary. 2, 3 starters, however you want to count it, in the secondary alone are out. And then just like with more guys coming out, it's a depleted group. I shouldn't say depleted. It's just definitely battle tested. It's got some second and third stringers in there right now for sure. The task is at hand for that defensive line, and it just definitely got a little bit harder for them. More is on their plate. They have to make more plays if the secondary is not going to have this great coverage that you kind of felt really good about coming into the year. Because when you're coming into the year, you're thinking like Josh Scott's going to lock someone down. Jordan Toney, he's going to progress and be, a good complementary option off the bench. Javian Norman, once he gets his shots, he'll be pretty decent. But, I don't think that they were expecting to have Javian Norman and Jordan Toney start 3 games into the year already. Like that doesn't make sense to me. So thumbs up to the improvements when these guys are on the field, at least in terms of the yardage, right? Obviously, that's a huge, huge improvement. Offensively, defensively, it's very slight. Not really noticeable, honestly. I think it's just the points thing that people are kind of noticing a little bit right now, but obviously Jacksonville State, they were really good at getting some chunk plays. Washington was probably just like an overmatched sort of situation for them. So yeah, improvements are good. Injury bug, how much are you going to keep the improvements when the injury bug is still around? Got to get these guys healthy. Got to get these guys healthy to finish out the year. We're not going to make this too long. 4th down, my closing thought. I just want to look at 5 games, the next 5 games that EMU has on the schedule. You ready? Shouldn't say 5 games, the next 5 weeks. The next 5 weeks for Eastern. All right. So you have these 3 games that you just had, equally matched against UMass, tough road trip, flight to Washington, and then battle tested against Jacksonville State, come out with a double overtime victory at home. How is EMU going to transition from this part of the schedule into the MAC slate? This coming Saturday, there's St. Francis, the FCS school that looks like evil Kent State. They're 1-2 in the year. Their only win was against Kent State, their first ever FBS win. But of course, lost to 2 FCS schools. One of them was Central Connecticut. I don't remember who the other loss was to. After that, take on Kent State. They're 0-3, of course, lost to St. Francis. So they're not looking too hot right now. And then after that, you have a bye week. So I would expect some sort of load management situation to happen through these next 3 weeks, right? Bye week, of course, get ready, everybody. But St. Francis, Kent State, I don't know how much of a threat that either of them really pose on you, especially for the pace that EMU is moving at. I think EMU should be able to win both of those pretty clean, even with their secondary players in there. That said, they have to play like starters, right? They have to play like starters to avoid some early upset. And then after that, you play Miami, defending MAC champions. They're 0-2, not looking too hot. Don't know how much of a pulse they're going to, I shouldn't say pulse, but I don't know how much of a threat they're going to be offensively. They have a few pieces, but has not been I have not been very impressed with Miami's potential on offense. And then Central Michigan right after that on October 19th. They're 1-2 right now. Their only win is over Central Connecticut. Got slapped by FIU 52-16, I believe it was. And then they lost to Illinois this past week 30-9. Was it 30-9? Something like that. Yeah, it was 30-9. So if you're EMU, you're looking at the schedule, you're feeling pretty good about that. Don't worry about what's after that. We're not going to talk about that. I would rather just focus on chunks of the schedule at a time. We can get to the rest of that later. But still, not the greatest situation right now for EMU, just roster-wise and just looking at how many injuries have been popping up throughout the season. But still, if you're going to be an optimist about it and think okay, but they're out of the games now, but by October, these guys should be okay. Looking at the schedule, you should be feeling pretty good about that. But again, that depends on these guys. These guys, as in the starters, getting back on the field and playing healthy and playing like ones again. But until then, man, I think that EMU's playing at a pretty decent rate. They're not playing like a team that could go on and win a MAC championship. They don't have one of the more impressive wins on the schedule like Toledo and NIU have already pulled off. That said, man, they're making some improvements, all right? They're making the improvements necessary to have a better 2024 than they did 2023. And at this point in the season, is there really much more you could ask for out of this team?